If you picture the story of Noah, you almost certainly picture the exact same static, kind of sentimental painting we've all been handed.
Oh, absolutely. The classic Sunday school visual.
Right. You picture this noble, suffering prophet standing on a sandy hill. He's preaching to the masses. The rich, arrogant elites walk by and mock him. The general public calls him a liar. And finally, pushed to the absolute brink, he tearfully looks up to the heavens, prays for a miraculous intervention, and boom, the sky opens
A
up.
magical flood comes.
Exactly. The
Mhm.
bad guys wash away, and the good guys float away on a wooden boat. It is like the ultimate story of prophetic suffering rewarded by divine supernatural intervention. And if that is the story you think we are discussing today, you are going to want to brace yourself.
Yeah, we really need to strip away centuries of mythological baggage right out of the gate here. Because our mission today for this deep dive is to cut through that theological sentimentality completely. When you actually look at the linguistic and structural reality of the source text we are diving into today, specifically Surah Al-Mu'minun verses 23 through 26, you are not looking at a mystical bedtime story. You are looking at a hyper-rational socio-economic case study.
It reads way less like an ancient myth and much more like, I don't know, a modern systems engineering manual for human society.
It really is a terrifyingly accurate sociological masterclass. We are going to read this text today as an exploration of how ruling classes neutralize reformers, how entrenched systems of power protect themselves from objective truth, and, honestly, the exact mathematical mechanics of how civilizations collapse.
So, to give you an overview of the journey you are about to go on, it's an entirely structural blueprint. First, we are going to look at the evolutionary roots of human division to understand why the system is broken in the first place. Then, we are going to dissect the specific linguistic and political maneuvers that elites use to suppress systemic critiques. We'll examine why the concept of an ordinary person is so utterly terrifying to power. And finally, we'll uncover the real chilling meaning behind the ultimate political weapon, the label of the madman.
Because to cure the disease, you really have to accurately diagnose the system first. And the text begins with a very specific historical diagnosis of mankind's sociological evolution.
It doesn't just jump into the conflict.
No, not at all. The source material points out that humanity began as a single, unified community. The terminology used is Ummah Wahidah, mankind, as one single group.
Which makes total sense anthropologically, right? Like early human existence was purely about surviving the elements.
Exactly. But here is the critical divergence. Animal life is governed strictly by that biological imperative to survive, eat, sleep, reproduce. Human life, however, possesses an entirely different operational layer.
The intellectual layer.
Right. We are defined by concepts, by values, by the potential to organize into a higher order of existence. I mean, a lion does not need a legal framework to govern its interaction with a gazelle.
No, it just exerts physical dominance. The lion doesn't negotiate property rights, it just eats.
Humans, however, have the intellectual capacity to conceptualize fairness, justice, and the future. And yet, this original, unified community eventually fractured. The sources trace this anthropological shift beautifully.
Yeah, let's unpack that shift, because it wasn't an overnight thing.
No, it took time. If you look at the earliest tribal structures, there was no concept of private property as we understand it in a modern capitalist sense. In many early human languages, there wasn't even a word for possession,
Wait, really? No word for owning something.
just a concept of utility. You utilized a piece of land to grow food, you utilized a tool to hunt, but you didn't own the land in a way that permanently excluded other human beings from surviving.
So you couldn't, like, hoard a forest?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, taking that a step further, the friction begins when the material conditions change, populations grow, tribes migrate, they discover highly fertile lands, secure water sources, and
Suddenly, the concept of a border is invented.
yes, divisions emerge organically at first. You have tribal divisions, territorial divisions, racial divisions based on geography, but the text pinpoints the ultimate fracture, the one that fundamentally broke the human system.
And it was an economic fracture.
Entirely economic.
It's the invention of surplus wealth. The exact moment humanity learned to produce more than it strictly needed for its daily biological survival. You grow surplus grain, you mine surplus resources, and society essentially bifurcates.
The birth of classes. You
Yeah.
suddenly have two distinct groups. On one side, you have the individuals doing the actual physical labor to produce the resources.
The workers.
Right. And on the other side, you see the emergence of a newly minted capitalist class. And We are using capitalist here in the broadest sociological sense.
Okay.
The class that controls the capital, the surplus.
They accumulate that surplus without actually doing the labor required to generate it.
And by controlling the surplus, they turn the laborers into dependents.
Yeah.
The entire dynamic of human existence shifts. The laborer is no longer working just to survive against nature.
Right. They are working to enrich the surplus holder.
Yes, who then doles out just enough of that surplus for the laborer to stay alive and return to work the next day.
Okay, I have to challenge this framing a bit, though, because looking at this from a purely rational standpoint, humans are intellectually advanced. We have philosophers, we have ethical frameworks.
Sure.
Why couldn't human intellect, or even just universal secular ethics like basic principles of don't steal, be fair, ensure basic survival for your neighbor, why couldn't that fix the economic divide?
I mean, even the most Machiavellian political systems realize you need basic functional laws to prevent a societal revolt.
Right. It's honestly the most vital question you can ask, and the source material tackles it head on. Why didn't human intellect repair the fracture?
Yeah, why did it fail? Because human intellect had already been compromised by elite interests. Intellect is just a neutral tool. It can be utilized to engineer justice, or it can be utilized to rationalize massive exploitation.
Oh, I see.
When you look at secular ethics, or those basic manners you mentioned, they are incredibly malleable. The ruling class simply co-opts them.
Give me a practical mechanism for how they do that. Like, how do you co-opt don't steal?
Well, the elite enshrine don't steal into law, but they hold the power to define what stealing actually is.
Oh, wow.
Right, they define it as a starving laborer taking a loaf of bread from their overflowing surplus storehouse. They will violently punish that action.
While ignoring their own actions.
Exactly. Meanwhile, they do not define their own systemic hoarding of natural resources or their underpaying of the laborers who generated those resources as stealing.
They call it something else entirely.
They define their actions as business acumen, the natural order of the market, or the rule of law.
So the definition of the ethic itself is rigged from the top down?
Fundamentally rigged. And it goes well beyond secular law. Even religion, lowercase religion, was hijacked.
Institutional religion.
Yes. The elites would engineer or co-opt religious structures to sanction their surplus wealth. They would claim that God favored them, which is why they had full storehouses. And they'd claim that the suffering of the poor was a divinely ordained test.
So human intellect and corrupted religious sentiment became the primary mechanisms of the disease. They were never going to be the cure.
Never.
Which perfectly sets up the actual purpose of revelation in this socio-economic context. The message brought by a reformer, in this case Noah, is not a self-help manual. It isn't about teaching people basic manners or how to be polite.
It is a radical revolutionary intervention.
Right.
The purpose of this specific intervention was to introduce a single objective law to resolve these socio-economic conflicts, an objective standard that sits above human intellect, designed specifically to dismantle arbitrary human-over-human dominance.
Because it levels the playing field entirely. The objective law applies equally to the surplus holder and the laborer.
Precisely.
So into this highly divided, economically exploitative system steps the reformer. And in Surah Al-Mu'minun, verse 24, Noah essentially diagnoses the broken math of their society. He points out that the structure is inherently unjust and unsustainable, and he introduces this new objective standard. So who is the first to respond to this threat? Who speaks up to shut him down?
The text is surgical in its precision here. It is not the general public. It's not a mob of ordinary citizens getting angry in the street.
No, our sources dive deep into the linguistics here, and the Arabic term used is al-mala.
Al-milia. This is the structural actor of our case study. The linguistic root of this word refers to being full or being filled up.
Like physically full.
Yes, but in a socio-political context, it means the council of chiefs, the assembly of the elites. It literally implies the people whose storehouses are full of grain, whose bellies are full, the heavyweights of society.
The people who hold all the surplus, the ones who have absolutely everything to lose if the system undergoes structural change.
And the text pairs that noun with a very specific descriptive verb. Al-malo alatine kafaru, the chiefs who kafaru.
Now, if you pick up a standard traditional translation, kafaru is almost universally translated as disbelieved.
Which is such a massive distortion of the actual sociology.
Yeah, because it paints a picture of a group of elites sitting around debating the theology of Noah and just deciding they don't believe in his specific conception of God.
Right, like as an academic seminar.
But the sources we are looking at strip all that theological framing away to reveal something much more sinister.
Linguistically, the root of kafaru, which is kufur, has absolutely nothing to do with abstract theological disbelief. The root means to cover, to bury, or to conceal.
To conceal.
Think of an agrarian society. A farmer covering a seed with dark dirt is performing an act of kufur. In this socio-political context, it means they recognize the evidence, and their immediate reaction was to conceal it.
They saw the data.
They saw the undeniable truth of the reformers' socio-economic diagnosis, and their absolute imperative was to cover it up.
So they aren't non-believers engaging in a seminary debate. They are acting as the ultimate corporate crisis management team.
That's exactly what they are.
Their entire social function in that exact moment is to act as a concealment layer.
Yeah.
They have to intercept the reformers' data before it disseminates to the broader public.
The Malamo function as the system's firewall. Think about the stakes from their perspective.
Right.
If the general population, the laborers, the exploited classes, realizes that the system is artificially rigged, that their poverty isn't a natural phenomenon or some divine decree, but the direct mathematical result of elite hoarding, what is the inevitable outcome?
The elites lose their authority instantly. The entire structure collapses under the weight of a mass awakening.
So the Mala literally cannot afford for a genuine debate on the facts to occur. Engaging with the reformers' objective math is a losing strategy.
Because the math proves they're guilty.
Exactly. They must immediately launch a counter-narrative to neutralize the threat. They have to discredit the messenger so thoroughly that the masses never even look at the data.
And the crisis management playbook opens with a very specific move. The text tells us they turn to the masses, they point at the reformer and say, "He is nothing but a human like you. Basharun Mithlukum."
They reduce him entirely to his material category.
Right. They argue that if this message of reform were truly valid, an angel would have delivered it. And honestly, this is a point that historically always confused me. Why is a human messenger so utterly terrifying to the ruling class? Why would they actually prefer the idea of an angel dropping out of the sky? It seems counterintuitive.
It does seem that way, but to understand it, you really have to examine the epistemology of power itself. How do elites justify their rule to the people they are subjugating?
Usually through some myth of superiority.
Exactly. Historically, across almost all civilizations, the ruling class derives its authority from the claim that the social order is natural, inevitable, or divinely sanctioned. Kings claim the divine right to rule. Modern billionaires claim they possess a superior intellect and unparalleled work ethic. The entire architecture of their power rests on an illusion of inherent supremacy.
So they say, we sit at the top of the pyramid because we naturally belong at the top. You sit at the bottom because you belong at the bottom.
Precisely. Now imagine if an angel actually did come down from the sky with a message of reform. The elites could easily manage that PR crisis.
Really? Because an angel sounds like a pretty intimidating disruption to the status quo.
Intimidating, yes. But an angel does not threaten their human supremacy. The elites could simply pivot and say to the masses, well, obviously that is an angel. Angels are made of light, they have supernatural powers, they operate on an entirely different plane of existence.
Oh, I see.
But among humans, we are still the apex. The angel is a supernatural exception to the rule. It allows them to maintain the human hierarchy perfectly intact.
The rules don't apply to angels, but the rules absolutely still apply to you.
Exactly. But if a regular guy, a bashar, just a human with no supernatural backing, no royal lineage, no massive wealth, if he does the math and points out the systemic exploitation,
that's a totally different threat.
It's an existential threat. If an ordinary person, utilizing nothing but reason and objective evidence, can accurately diagnose that the system is broken and successfully propose an equitable alternative, the illusion of supremacy shatters completely.
Because it proves definitively that you do not need divine blood or immense wealth to understand or architect justice.
It implies that everyone in the society can see it. It destroys the myth that the elites possess some exclusive cognitive or spiritual right to rule.
The curtain is pulled back, and the authority of the elite suddenly rests on nothing but naked force.
And because the elite cannot debate the ordinary human on the factual merits of his argument, Because the math objectively proves the elite are exploiting the masses, they have to reframe his objective critique as a selfish power grab.
They changed the subject.
They tell the public he just wants to gain superiority over you. He doesn't actually care about justice or objective law. He just wants to sit in the chief's chair instead of us.
It is the ultimate psychological projection. They are projecting their own hyper-transactional, power-hungry motives right onto the reformer.
Because they desperately need the public to believe that everyone is as inherently corrupt as they are. If everyone is corrupt, then the current corrupt system is the best anyone can hope for.
Wow. That brings us to the second phase of the elite's counterattack, which really gets into the economics of truth versus the metric of wealth. Because this clash between the reformer and the concealment layer isn't happening in a vacuum. There is an audience.
A very specific audience, yes.
The elites are looking very closely at who is actually responding to the reformer's message.
And the demographic breakdown of the movement is incredibly telling.
According to the text, the elites publicly mock the reformer because his followers are the lowest or meanest of society. The arid heel. These are the laborers, the working class, the people with zero social or economic standing.
This reveals the core metric of the elite worldview. They equate wealth with worth and capital with truth.
Capital with truth.
It's how they operate. To the mullah, the validity of a statement is entirely determined by the socio-economic status of the person making it. If a wealthy, powerful person proposes an idea, it must be true because their wealth validates them. If a poor, marginalized person proposes an idea, it must be false.
It is the ad hominem fallacy, but scaled up to govern an entire societal structure.
Exactly. And the elites, operating in their capacity as the concealment layer, make a tactical move here. They offer a compromise.
The bribe.
They approach the reformer and say, listen, if you want a seat at the table with us, if you want us to take your message seriously and perhaps integrate some of your ideas into our governance, you have to cast away these lower-class citizens. Discard the riffraff, stop associating with the laborers, and we can negotiate.
I want to dig into that because on the surface, offering someone a seat at the table sounds like standard diplomacy. It sounds like a peaceful attempt at integration. Why should we view this purely as a cynical bribe rather than a genuine offer to reform from within?
Because the condition of the offer requires the reformer to violate the very objective standard he is trying to establish.
Oh, right.
If he abandons the marginalized to gain favor with the elite, he is conceding that human worth is dictated by social class. He is accepting their rigged metric.
He'd be playing by their rules.
They are trying to co-opt the movement. If they can get him to compromise his objective standard of justice for the sake of elite approval, he becomes one of them. He proves that he actually was just looking for superiority in a comfortable position. He becomes corrupt, and the threat is neutralized.
But the reformer completely short-circuits this trap. He absolutely refuses to abandon the marginalized, and then he deploys a concept that completely breaks the elite's operational framework. He states explicitly that he wants no compensation, no wage, and no material reward for his message. I ask of you no reward.
That phrase is a devastating structural blow to the elite's entire worldview.
Why does the lack of a price tag baffle them so deeply?
Because the mullahs have built and rely entirely upon a purely capitalist transactional system. In their reality, absolutely everything and everyone has a price. Right. Their entire mechanism for controlling society is based on the assumption that human beings are motivated strictly by material gain or the fear of material loss. You either bribe a threat to be quiet by offering them surplus, or you financially ruin them if they refuse to stop speaking.
The carrot and the stick, but both are literally forged out of money.
When a reformer refuses compensation, when he explicitly states he cannot be bought, and when he refuses to trade the marginalized for political power, the elites realize their primary weapon is totally useless.
They have no leverage.
None. He cannot be integrated into their system of exploitation because he refuses to play their game entirely.
He is operating on a completely different, uncorrupted operating system.
And because he is utterly immune to their economic weapons, bribery, and social climbing, they are forced to escalate. The concealment layer has failed to bury the message through economic means, so they move to their final, most destructive political weapon.
This brings us to verse 25 of Surah Al-Mu'minun, the ultimate silencer. When bribery fails, when discrediting his followers fails, the mullah issue their final, definitive diagnosis to the public. They point at the reformer and say, he is a man possessed, bihi jinna, a madman.
Majnun.
Once again, the source material forces us to strip away our modern clinical understanding of this word, as well as the superstitious ancient understanding of it. This is absolutely not a theological judgment about demons.
No.
And it is not a medical judgment about his brain chemistry or mental health.
It is a highly calculated, desperate, and incredibly effective political weapon. The label of Majnun is deployed specifically and only when someone with no material interest in the status quo describes that status quo accurately and cannot be bought off.
I was thinking about how this mechanism works in a modern context, and it feels like the ultimate ignore this user button for society.
That's a great way to put it.
Like, imagine you are the CEO of a massive corporation, and a mid-level accountant walks into the boardroom during a shareholder meeting. He throws a spreadsheet on the table and says, "Look at the math. The company is bankrupt, and the executive board has been systematically embezzling funds."
Okay, high stakes.
As the CEO, you have two choices. You can go through the math line by line in front of the shareholders and try to prove him wrong.
Which you can't do because he's right.
Exactly. Or you can turn to corporate security and say, please remove him. He's having a hallucination. He's lost his mind. It's a tragic mental breakdown. If you can convince the room the guy looking at the spreadsheet is hallucinating, you never have to actually verify his math.
That is a perfect encapsulation of how the Majnun label functions structurally. It completely protects the system from having to debate the reformer on the facts.
It just shuts down the conversation.
By declaring Bihijin literally that his intellect is covered or obscured, they are stating he is not rational. Therefore, his diagnosis of society is invalid data.
It's an epistemological quarantine. You isolate the ideas by destroying the credibility of the vessel carrying them.
By pathologizing the messenger as irrational, dangerous, or extreme, the establishment instructs the masses to simply discount everything he says. The masses don't need to do the hard work of engaging with his systemic critique because the elites have assured them he's crazy.
Don't listen to that guy.
And what is the follow-up instruction from the elite in the text? Fadarabasu bihaharahin. Just wait a while.
Wait and see.
They tell the public to just wait it out. Let him fade away. Let him die in obscurity. Let the news cycle move on to the next distraction.
Because the logic of the system dictates that if you just wait out a crazy person who has no resources and no institutional backing, eventually they will self-destruct.
It is the final, most sophisticated mechanism of the concealment layer. It's the ultimate act of kufra, the ultimate burying of objective truth, disguised as public safety or psychological concern.
We have to move now to the climax of the text, verse 26. Noah's famous prayer. Every religious tradition has a version of this specific moment.
Right.
The reformer has been utterly rejected. He has been labeled a madman. His followers are marginalized and threatened. He turns to the divine and says, "My Lord, help me because they have denied the truth. Rabbi, unsurni bima katabu."
And here is where we most violently dismantle the traditional, sentimental reading of this verse, because it completely misses the profound sociological reality of what is actually happening.
The Sunday school version is just so ingrained in us. Noah cries out, God hears him, and God sends a magical flood from the sky to drown the bad guys and save Noah on his boat. It's framed as this miraculous supernatural rescue mission.
But if we read this text as a masterclass in systems engineering, which the linguistic evidence demands we do, that interpretation falls apart entirely. Noah is not crying out for a magical flood to save his own life. He is making a structural appeal to the law of requital.
The law of requital. Our sources use the terminology mukafat e amal. Let's break down exactly what that means.
Mukafat amal is the universal law of cause and effect. It is the foundational principle that every single action has a natural, inevitable consequence built into the very fabric of reality.
Like physics.
Exactly. Just as putting your hand in a fire will result in a burn, not because an angry deity decided to punish your hand, but because that is the immutable physical law of heat societies also operate on immutable structural laws.
So when Noah says, help me, or unsurni, he isn't saying, send a helicopter to extract me from this mess.
Absolutely not. He is stating a scientific sociological certainty. He is observing the society and concluding a civilization that builds its foundation on economic exploitation, that systematically suppresses accurate information, that creates an elite PR layer to lie to its citizens, and that pathologizes its truth tellers. That society has permanently sealed its own fate.
The victory he is asking for, then, isn't necessarily his own personal survival?
The victory is the vindication of the objective truth. Help me because they have denied the truth means let the universal laws of cause and effect operate upon their denial. Let the logic of their corrupted system play out to its inevitable conclusion.
He's effectively saying, I've shunned them the math, they've labeled me a madman and deliberately ignored the math. Now, let the math do what math does.
The system destroys itself by the very mechanism it utilized to defend itself. When a society deliberately blinds itself to objective reality, when it buries the data because that data threatens the elite's surplus, it loses the ability to navigate reality.
Think about society as an airplane flying through a storm. The reformer is the altitude warning alarm screaming that you are flying too low.
Great analogy.
The elite pilots don't want to hear it because pulling up would require burning expensive fuel, so they convince the passengers the alarm is just a malfunction. They turn the alarm off, they feel incredibly victorious and peaceful for about 3 minutes, until they fly directly into a mountain.
And when that plane hits the mountain, it is not a divine punishment in the sense of a lightning bolt thrown by an angry god. It is a mathematical inevitability. It is the natural consequence of ignoring the altimeter. Civilizational collapse is the ultimate expression of mukafat amal.
That reframing completely changes how you perceive the end of that story. The flood isn't a magic trick pulled out of a hat. It is the inevitable, catastrophic failure of a system that vehemently refused to course correct.
It is the systemic collapse that the elites genuinely thought they could avoid simply by silencing the reformer. But you cannot silence reality. You can only delay your encounter with it. And sociologically speaking, the longer a system delays that encounter by suppressing truth, the more catastrophic the eventual collision.
We need to zoom out here because we've just done a very deep structural teardown of these 4 specific verses. And the realization that should be hitting anyone listening right now is, well, this isn't just about Noah.
It was never just about Noah. And that is the true synthesis of this entire deep dive. This text was never meant to be read merely as a historical biography of one man in antiquity. It is a permanent, recurring, sociological blueprint.
It's the exact template for how entrenched power operates across all of human history.
It's a pipeline. Every single reformer, every whistleblower, every paradigm shifter who has ever threatened vested economic or political interest has been forced through this exact same sequence of suppression.
Let's run through it again. Look at the historical pattern. Step 1. They are reduced to their material category. He's just a human. Who is he to tell us what to do? He doesn't have the right degree, he doesn't have wealth, he's not an approved expert from our institution.
Step 2. They are viciously attacked for the demographic of their followers. Look at the kind of people who support this movement. It's just the angry working class, the uneducated, the marginalized. No serious, respectable person listens to this.
Step 3. The refusal of the bribe and the subsequent panic. The system tries to absorb the threat, to find their price, to offer them a seat at the table in exchange for dropping their core principles.
But when the system realizes the reformer is operating on objective standards rather than transactional greed, the establishment panics.
And finally, step 4, pathologizing the truth teller. He's crazy, he's a conspiracy theorist, he's a radical, he's extreme, he's a danger to public safety. The deployment of the Madman label.
It is the exact same playbook, operating on the exact same logic, whether you are looking at ancient Mesopotamia, the Roman Empire, the French Revolution, or a modern corporate boardroom in the 21st century.
The same exact moves.
The establishment will always defend its surplus and its authority by creating a concealment layer of PR, and when that concealment inevitably fails, it will medicalize or criminalize the dissent.
Once you recognize this pattern, you literally cannot unsee it. You look at history, you look at modern political movements, you look at how massive corporations deal with internal whistleblowers. The mechanics are all right there. The Al-Mala, the elite assembly, are still actively operating today. They just wear tailored suits instead of ancient robes.
And that is precisely why treating this text as a systems engineering manual is so vital. It actively trains your mind to recognize the mechanisms of exploitation and the specific tactics of the concealment layer.
It demands rigorous critical thinking.
It tells you that when the entire establishment points at one individual who is armed with nothing but data and calls that person mad, you need to look very, very closely at the data they're trying to bury.
Because the survival of the civilization might literally depend on it. If you ignore the diagnosis, you mathematically guarantee the collapse.
The law of requital does not grant exemptions.
This has been absolutely mind-bending. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to bring this theoretical framework right to the doorstep of your own life. You've heard the blueprint. You now know exactly how the system operates to protect itself from objective truth. And the question for you today is not to look back in history and casually ask, I wonder who the Noah of that era was.
No, looking backward is safe. The vital question for our civilizational survival right now is much more urgent and much more uncomfortable.
Think about the media you consume, the political discourse you participate in, the corporate environments you navigate. What is the modern Madman label? What is the specific word or phrase we use today to diagnose someone as crazy, dangerous, or extreme so that we don't have to do the hard work of listening to their math? And most importantly, who is the establishment applying that label to right now simply because that person is accurately describing the glaring contradictions of our own system? Are they actually crazy, or is the alarm just ringing in a plane that refuses to pull up? Think about it.